Welcome back to Now Hacks. This is one of our first snack bites, and I wanted to talk today about the ServiceNow SDK, but specifically we're going to talk about Fluent. What it is, how it works. There's a couple of things that I've seen or heard more specifically that are concerns that are fairly valid. What happens when I use Fluent? What happens if Fluent isn't supported in the future or ServiceNow decides to go another way? I wanted to touch on a couple of things. We're going to jump right into it here. So I've got the demo app open right now that I used in my previous video. And we're going to talk about the Fluent files in here and what happens. All I've done so far is pull from Git that demo SDK app. I haven't even done an npm install yet. The first thing I'm actually going to do is create a new file for my node version. I prefer to use a Linux VM when I'm doing my development, or OS X, just because Windows is a little difficult sometimes when doing any type of node development, I've found. I'm sure there's people out there who will argue with that. That's totally okay. This is just my preference. So I'm going to set this to 22.16.0. And then when I'm in my app, because I have node version set up, I should be able to do node version, and it's using that node version file. All right, we're good there. So now I'm going to do an npmi, and this should install everything that's required for this particular application. The reason I need to do this is because I'm going to do a build, and I want to walk through what happens when I'm actually using Fluent, and what happens when I run a build and push to my instance. So you're going to see this error a lot. Essentially, there is a Fluent language server that is a extension for VS Code, or I'm using Cursor, which is based off of VS Code. And this helps with some of the support for Fluent. The first question here is, what is Fluent? That's actually a question we're not going to answer first, because I want to show a build and then we can walk backwards a little bit to understand what Fluent is. So my npmi has run, it created my package lock, it created my node modules. So now I should be able to run the SDK locally. I'm going to run an npx now SDK build. What this is going to do is npx it's not a ServiceNow thing, it's a node execution. It's basically going to say, since I'm in a package right now, we're in a project, it is going to use the ServiceNow SDK version that is installed with the project. So 3.0.1 here. This is nice because if you've got multiple projects and you maybe haven't updated the SDK, or there's an error in a particular version of the SDK, you can choose what version of the SDK you want to run. As long as that's set in your package, you can use npx now SDK build, and it will use whatever version is installed in the project itself. So I'm going to go ahead and run that. And we can see over here on the left, under Fluent generated, again, this is the same application I used in the last video. I've got 2 Fluent files. Now, during the build process, what it's going to do is it's going to read through those Fluent files and build those into XML. This is pretty important because one of the concerns I've heard is, if I use Fluent, what happens if ServiceNow stops supporting it? The key thing is Fluent never goes to the ServiceNow instance. Fluent is completely focused on your local development environment. Unless you're using the ServiceNow IDE, technically speaking, you're in a separate development environment, just like what I have here locally. Those Fluent files are not in the ServiceNow instance itself. Those Fluent files stay separate, and then they are built using the SDK. And so what happened now is when I ran that SDK build, you can see here it finished copying static metadata. So first key thing there is I don't have to use Fluent. And I think I talked about this in the previous video. I can use Fluent, and it will also use whatever I have in my metadata, which is really nice now, especially, and this came out in version 3, where I can incrementally start moving to Fluent. I can leave things in metadata if I want, and then I can just move my script includes, or I can just move my database objects or my dictionary, things like that. The really nice thing here is you can incrementally see what the SDK is doing. So it took these files, it would merge them with whatever metadata I had right here, and then it creates this dist folder. And inside this dist folder, you have app, and then you have dictionary, scope, and update. This is how most teams at ServiceNow have been building plugins and scoped apps for forever. So this is actually a very old development process, just brought out to us, the layperson. But now it built this particular table. So I should see this under dictionary, and I do. And I see just the one element. So let me look in here. Yeah, I have no actual columns in here. So it's got just the actual database collection object. So if you went to sys dictionary, all I would have is that collection object. This is the XML that I would normally see if I did an export XML, or the metadata that I would see if I pushed this using the old school Studio Git integration. And so I can see what it's building. So I can make sure incrementally, have I defined things properly? Now, the nice thing about that is with Fluent and the domain specific language, during that build process, it'll tell me if there are errors. If there are certain things that I am trying to do, I can actually ignore certain things for the type checking and whatnot in Fluent. If I'm trying to do something special, I can come in here and check to see what that looks like. I can see my scoped app, my sys app file, which is exactly what I would see normally if I did take a look at the sys app within ServiceNow, and then my update, which has a bunch of little things. We can see here that I've got the ACLs that were created based off of my table. I can see a package dependency that was generated. I can see my DB object and my dictionary. More importantly, I should be able to see my script include. If we go back down here, we can see that my script include is defined just as a now include within the Fluent file. And then I've got my actual script include inside includes folder. This is nice because it's now in a JS file, which I can version control, compare, edit, and test. It all gets built down into the XML that we are used to as ServiceNow developers. It builds this dist folder, and I can see all of that. This zip file right here is what it's actually going to push to ServiceNow. So this gets uploaded to a particular endpoint, which has been there for a long time, to install my sys app into the instance. And so I can actually go into here and look at open containing folder, and I can see that, and I can even open it up and take a look at what is getting pushed to the ServiceNow instance as well. And so in this episode, in this discussion, what I really wanted to focus on was what is happening when I build a Fluent file, and what happens if ServiceNow eventually decides to move away from this particular development process. Now, personally, I don't think that's going to happen. They've put a lot of effort into this. I think it's the future of ServiceNow development. The nice thing is, if there is ever a break in the SDK, I can always go back and use a previous version. ServiceNow publishes all of this to npmjs.org. I can go here and take a look at ServiceNow SDK. And I can look at the previous versions. So even if ServiceNow, for some reason, completely discontinued the development of the SDK, or if there's an error in a particular version of the SDK, I can always go back and use a previous version. I can always come in here and download or use a previous version, unless they physically come in here and remove them from npmjs.org. There's lots of backups for that as well, even if they did decide to do that. But that's it for this Snack Bites. I just wanted to run through and show you what happens with Fluent, why I don't necessarily need to worry too much about the SDK itself, as long as it's able to build my project right now and push it to my instance and work properly, then overall I'm going to be okay in the future as well. Thanks for joining me. Have a wonderful day. Take care.